There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello BookTube, I'm Sean the Book Maniac. Welcome back to my channel. Here I am with another In Other Words, an occasional series where I talk about interesting vocabulary, expressions, idioms, grammatical patterns that I encounter in my reading. So let's get started. Here are a few from Don Quixote, the classic by Cervantes, that I started on January 1st with the intention of reading along with a bunch of other avid readers from around the world on social media, a chapter a day, until we finished in early May. But today I have bailed because it got really old really fast. But before I bailed, I read a fifth of it, I think. I got some good vocabulary. I'm not going to quote most of the sentences these words come from, but somebody or other, maybe Don Quixote himself, asks somebody else to grant me a boon. Well, I knew boon as being kind of good fortune or something positive, but to grant me a boon, I wasn't sure. So the meaning that I know, the more modern meaning, is a thing that is helpful or beneficial. So that a boost of somebody's fortunes or something. This new highway will be a boon to travelers. But the archaic meaning, which is definitely being used here, is a favor or request. So grant me a boon, grant me a favor. Comes from the Old Norse through Middle English. Redound is one of those antiquated, pompous words that we don't need, but I was interested, why did we ever have this word? If something redounds to somebody's honor or redounds to somebody's reputation, it means it contributes greatly to that person's honor or reputation. The example sentence from the dictionary, the latest diplomatic effort will redound to his credit. Will contribute greatly to his credit. I hope this video redounds to mine. But it's the etymology that's really interesting. So it comes from late Middle English and from Old French redonde, and then Latin redundare. I don't know if I'm pronouncing any of those words correctly, but the sense of surging up or overflowing, and the related, maybe a more metaphorical meaning of to be in profusion. And the original meaning has a hydrological origin, water flowing. Andere, I don't know which language, I think this is, yeah, andere in Latin, to rise up in waves. And it's a nasalized form of the root, spelled, I have no idea how to pronounce it, W-E-D, so I'll talk about that in a minute. But it's etymologically linked to redundant. Redundant comes from the same Latin word redundare, overflowing, pour over. So too much so as not to be of use, like, is the spin on redundant, right? But it comes from, and the British employment meaning, employment position has been rendered redundant or whatever, comes from the same. Well, I hope this video isn't redundant. But let's talk about that root. It's a Proto-Indo-European root, W-E-D, but gets nasalized, so here, red, instead of wed, but again, redundant and redound, so it's pronounced R-E plus the consonant. And that means water or wet, and it shows up in, I'll just give you some of these words that we all know and use: abound, carbohydrate, dropsy, hydrangea, hydrant, hydrous, inundate, otter, surround, undulate, vodka, wash, water, wet, whiskey, and winter. All of those, if you know how to look for it, that root, wed, W-E-D or R-E-D, is in there. Wow, that's the most fascinating thing of the whole video. You can turn it off now. No, I've got lots more. The next one, I didn't check the pronunciation, so let me do that.
Varlet.
Okay, so varlet. The lord of the castle was a varlet and a discourteous knight, so I could guess it was something negative, and in fact, the historical meaning is a man or boy acting as an attendant or a servant, but then the archaic meaning that flew out of that, because I guess servants are bad, is a dishonest or unprincipled man. Comes from the Old French and very closely etymologically linked to the word that most of us know, valet, as attendant. The rogue meaning dates from the mid-16th century. And valet and varlet come from the old French vassal. And anybody who's done a first-year history course of European history will be familiar with vassal. Wow. A gird a sword. Somebody in Don Quixote says, O thou, whosoever thou art, rash knight, who cometh to touch the armor of the most valiant knight, who e'er girded on a sword. So basically, gird on a sword or gird a sword, it seems to show up both transitively, gird a sword, and gird on a sword intransitively. One of the literary meanings, because this is a very old word that's barely used anymore, is to encircle a person or a part of the body with a belt or a band. The boy was girded with the belt of knighthood. But the meaning that's being used here, also very highly literary, is to secure a garment or a sword on the body with a belt or band. So that's what's going on there. I was vaguely familiar with the idiom to gird one's loins, also gird up one's loins, and that's to prepare or strengthen oneself for what might be coming. The Old English girdan is to put a belt or circle around, encircle, bind, and that comes from Proto-Germanic, Old Norse, Old Saxon, Old High German, and throughout its whole history it's usually used rhetorically, more or less related to things in the Bible, which I didn't check. And it's etymologically related to other things about the waist, and they are girth and girdle. Comes from the same root. Isn't that interesting? Oh my. I'm at the stage of life where, because of my girth, I'd rather girdle my loins than gird my loins. I don't think loins is quite the right part of the body that a girdle is required, would be necessary for. But moving on! Sally forth! I knew what it meant. I knew it was just this ridiculous, pretentious literary phrase which means let us go. Let's go, let's leave. But I was curious, I saw it here, like, well, why does it mean that? So the meaning is, if you sally forth, and it's again really pretentious, artificial literary language, it means to leave a safe place in a brave or confident way in order to do something difficult. Well, I didn't know it had all those nuances. But sally dates from the 1540s in English, a sudden rush, dash, or springing forth, specifically of troops from a besieged place, attacking the besiegers. Comes from the Middle French sailler, a rushing forth, and originally the Latin salere, to leap, and is etymologically linked to salient. Why? I didn't check that, because salient means relevant, right? Let's do one more rabbit hole, shall we? So, salient dates from the same time, leaping. It has all of those same origins, but salient came to mean, from about the late 17th century, pointing outward, and then, more figuratively, prominent, striking. So, most important thing. Oh, interesting. Okay. I don't know if you're learning anything, but I just learned something. I think this is pronounced the normal way. I've just checked online, and I'm not confident that I will trust what I found. But fulling hammers, which are huge tools for the process of fulling, which is a part of a textile manufacturing process of olden times. Fulling was also known as tucking or walking, and it's a step in woolen cloth making. And I'm not good at, so I'm just going to read as eloquently, as animatedly as I can what I found, because I can't explain it without reading it. It was a step in woolen cloth making which involves the cleansing of cloth, particularly wool, to eliminate oils, dirt, and other impurities, and to make the cloth thicker. The worker who does that job is a fuller, a tucker, or a walker, all of which have become common surnames, so that's interesting. The Welsh word for a fulling mill is a pandy, and that appears in many Welsh place names. So, going back to the medieval period, the fulling process was often undertaken in a water mill, known as a fulling mill, a walk mill, or a tuck mill, and in Wales, a pandy. In these, the cloth was beaten with wooden hammers, known as fulling stocks or fulling hammers. So, in typical Don Quixote fashion, he and Sanchez or Sancho or whatever his name is, they happen upon fulling hammers, which of course Don Quixote believes are some enemy that must be attacked. I didn't know what that was, and now I do. Next was this book of short stories from Ireland, Walking the Dog by Bernard McClaverty, a collection that I read in early January and really, really liked, 4 stars. And I have a handful from it. One very Irish word or phrase, a bee special, in the story A Silent Retreat, I believe, which is about a conversation that a boy at a boarding school, he's going to be 12 years old, has with a bee special, an armed guard at the prison next door. And I found out, because he was referred to as the bee special. A bee special is or a bee man, is the common name for the Ulster Special Constabulary, which was a quasi-military reserve special constable police force in Northern Ireland. As far as I am aware, having done just a shallow dive on Wikipedia, it started during the 1922 war and continued into, I don't know when, but into fairly modern times. It has been disbanded. An armed corps organized partially on military lines and called out in times of emergency, such as war or insurgency. But this prison guard was a bee special, so this story must have been set in troubled times in Northern Ireland. That bee special guy uses the word doo-lally, and that is British English that comes from Indian Army slang, and it usually is an adjective, which means temporarily deranged or feeble-minded, although it also can mean transported with excitement or pleasure. Let's look up the sentence. I've forgotten. That guard, that bee special dude, had a milk run, but he said, excuse this bee special man's French, if the milk round paid more, I wouldn't have to be standing here like some kind of a fucking doo-lally talking to you. So he's using it as a noun to mean, I don't know exactly, but it's a pejorative word that he's ascribing to himself, but the actual meaning is somebody who's insane. And the etymology is really interesting. It comes from the early 20th century, and it actually comes from a town in India called doo-lally that had a military sanatorium. So that's where the mentally ill soldiers, British soldiers, went, and it became an adjective. Isn't that fascinating? Next, Omphalos. There's a marvelous story here about a husband and wife on vacation. I can't remember which European country they are in. Spain, maybe? It's one of my favorites in the book. And she wanders off. It's called At the Beach. And she, the wife, wanders off by herself because her husband drinks so much that he spends half the day sleeping off his hangovers. And she wanders into this cathedral or something. And she's in this very sacred space, outdoor space on the cathedral grounds. And she has, what's the Joycean word? A catharsis that is just gorgeously written. And she remembers the word Omphalos. And the word Omphalos, I found out, is an ancient Greek word that means navel or the center, and it comes from a stone in the temple of Apollo at Delphi. And she was right in the center of the cathedral grounds, and she was having this Mandela-like epiphany, and it was a wonderful passage in the story. A word from Scottish and Northern English, hoach. So let's look up what... It's a incredibly politically incorrect sentence that has not only lots of F words, which I'm not shy about, but racist stuff too. But the paraphrase, the polite paraphrase is, he's complaining that his country, Northern Ireland, is hoachin' with IRA men. So he's objecting to the release of Nelson Mandela. So hoach means to be full of or swarming with. The place is hoaching with wee girls in pink leotards and tutus. And that comes from Middle English through Anglo-Norman French, hocher, shake to and fro, and the current sense dates from the late 18th century. But you only find that in Scottish English and Northern English. Correct me if I'm wrong. Fascinating. This one I'm going to do quickly because there is a 3-paragraph story in here about a man going through the airport security, and the young woman who's the guard asks him what's in the poster tube, and he says a print of Munch's The Scream, and she says, I prefer his mezzotints. Mezzotints? That's a type of printmaking, and what's relevant for the prefix mezzo is that it enables halftones to be produced without line or dot-based techniques like hatching, cross-hatching, or stipple. I have no idea what any of this means, so that's why I'm not going to give you more details. You can Google it. But mezzo means half, and so mezzo-soprano is a female singer with a voice pitched halfway between soprano and contralto. And a mezzotint is a print that in which halftones are enabled, are possible. So I could only find a reference, especially a visual reference, to one mezzotint by Edvard Munch, and here it is. This is one of my top reads of January, Celestial Bodies by Joka Alharti. This is a novel from Oman, and I filmed a full review of this novel, which will either be posted just before or just after this video. But just a couple phrases. I don't usually include foreign words or expressions unless they're used in English, but I'm making an exception because these two are fabulous, visually or otherwise, visually or orally. The first one is a Mandus chest, spelled either of the ways listed above, and it is a dowry chest in this part of the world, Oman specifically, I believe, but maybe in neighboring areas as well. There's a wonderful article on dowry chests all over the world with gorgeous photos. I'm going to put a link to that in the show notes, but is a part of the furniture expected in some of the newly betrothed women in this novel and inherited from their mothers and grandmothers. And next, from the same novel, oh, I wonder how this is pronounced. A musical instrument that I think is pronounced oud, O-U-D, is also part of the oral background, the sound, the audio background of this novel. And here's a picture of what it looks like, and I'm just going to give you a little bit of a sample of the lovely music that it makes. I have two pieces of vocabulary from this last book. Wild Geese by Martha Ostenso, a Canadian novel from 1925, and I just finished reading it the other day and really liked it. The first word is spavined. So this is about a tyrannical father on a homestead in Manitoba 100 years ago or more, and he controls and works his wife and children so close to the bone that they keep getting injured, and he's such an asshole. One of the daughters hurt her foot through overwork on the farm, and one of her other sisters says to her sympathetically, "Your foot looks like it's spavined." Spavined. Well, spavined is a veterinary term, so once I realized that it is usually a word that's used for horses, it's an injury, a disease of the hock joint, whatever that is, of horses in which enlargement occurs because of collected fluids. So it's that, or bony growth, or some kind of an enlargement, but it's not usually used for humans, and I think in her wisdom, Martha Ostenso used it there to show that the tyrannical father was using his children, abusing his children as if they were workhorses. But the other less veterinary meaning is for spavined is being of or marked by a decrepit or broken down condition. And the last one, in a trice. I'd never heard it. It means in a moment or very quickly. And this etymology is pretty darned interesting too. It comes from the Middle Dutch verb or word, I assume it's a verb, tricen, which means hoist, and trice, which means pulley. If you're hauling something up with a rope on a pulley, it's usually pretty quick. And the meaning of this, like I said, is in a moment or very quickly. So it's just one pull and it's up. Something from the well, water from the well, or whatever you're pulleying. And so it came to mean, but I'd never heard it, but in English, something that happens very quickly or in a moment. Well, that was fun. Thanks for watching.